much. I hope you're having a really good week and finding fun or productive ways to stay busy, which is probably what most of us are doing, is just trying to find ways to stay busy. Because when you don't have to go to work or you don't have to go to school, there's just tons of downtime and it can make the day seem really long. So I hope you're finding stuff to help keep you busy. As for me, I've been doing a lot of reading. In fact, I'm rereading a book right now that I've read so many times that the front cover has fallen off of. So I use the front cover as a bookmark, which is really funny. So I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been listening to a lot of records. Record that I got by a band called Raspberry Bulbs. They put this record out. It looks really, really neat. Another one that looks really cool when you pull it out. Got some more artwork on the inside too. So I've been listening to a lot of music. Shout out to Zaid, to Lily M, to Danielle, and to Aurelia for completing the comment challenge from last week. The correct answer to last week's video comment challenge was indeed Frantz Fanon. This is one of the books that I own by Frantz Fanon. Now, someone did comment and say that they thought that maybe it was James Baldwin, which was a really, really good guess because I talk about James Baldwin a lot in class, and quite frankly, they look at least a little bit similar. What we're going to do today for this video is we're going to recap week 3, which is technically not supposed to start until April 6th, but I think because all of the other packets were set for 3 weeks that many people went ahead and did week 3. So we'll go ahead and recap it. If you haven't done it yet, that's totally okay. This will give you some information that might be useful for you as you do it. And if you have done it already, great. We're going to go ahead and review it. Remember, this is after the American Revolution. These are no longer 13 British colonies. At this point in American history, we have an actual country called the United States. So the economy, which is how people make and spend, remember, money, was changing and growing mostly because of this Industrial Revolution. One of the things that was really important to the economy at this time was figuring out how they were going to get labor to perform a lot of the tasks that needed to be done. And one of the ways that they decided that they would get some of this labor and not have to pay for this labor was by continuing the use of this system of enslaving people. And so their thinking was that if they could get away with having labor to get these crops harvested and planted and get all these other tasks accomplished, and they didn't have to pay these people, then they would end up making more money. Sounds really great until you think about the fact that it was an entirely inhumane system of using people as if they were property or as if they were animals. This took the rights away completely from the enslaved Africans who were doing this labor. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly it is that slavery was. Slavery is essentially a system of forced labor, usually for low or little pay. So we should clarify that sometimes people who were enslaved did receive some kind of compensation, but if it was so little that they still couldn't take care of their basic needs, it was still something that we look back on in history and say that that still falls under the umbrella of slavery. The system of slavery in the United States, particularly in North and South America, was a uniquely brutal form of slavery. It's something that we often refer to as chattel slavery. And this is where the people who are enslaved are not even really treated as people. Really, really awful things that would happen in order to make sure that they had this labor force alive. So you had Africans who were kidnapped, stolen, bought, sold as slaves. They would come here to the United States, and once they got here, they could still be traded, bought, and sold. But from the time that there was any system of slavery in the United States, there were people who wanted to fight against it. A person who wants to end slavery, a person who not only wants to end slavery but works to end slavery, is what we call an abolitionist. And in this week's material, you were introduced to 4 notable abolitionists. Now, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of abolitionists dating all the way back to the time of the 13 colonies. And they did this in several different ways. They could do this through convincing, using their persuasive words and sharing their philosophies. This was something that Harriet Beecher Stowe and William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass would do. They would sometimes even do this through hand-to-hand combat, actually going to battle against other slave owners. There's famous revolts and raids that were done against slave owners led by abolitionists such as John Brown or Nat Turner. Nat Turner was actually based right here in Virginia, not very far from where you live. Or they were helping to guide enslaved Africans to help them free themselves. either through the Underground Railroad once that was officially established, or through some other kind of means. So on Monday, what you were tasked with doing was looking at three specific abolitionists: William Lloyd Garrison, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Frederick Douglass. And your job was to create a chart to talk about what their contributions were. William Lloyd Garrison was an author of a really, really important abolition newsletter that went out called The Liberator. In fact, I have a quote from him from one of his articles in the Liberator, and this actually comes in the preface to a book about Frederick Douglass. This is a really, really important book. You'll probably be required to read this at some point in your educational career. I would imagine probably in high school. It's a wonderful book, really important book to read. But William Lloyd Garrison in this book says, "Reader, are you with the man-stealers in sympathy and purpose, or on the side of their downtrodden victims? If with the former, then you are the foe of God and man. If with the latter, what are you prepared to do and dare on their behalf? Be faithful, be vigilant, be untiring in your efforts to break every yoke and let the oppressed go free. Come what may, cost what it may, inscribe on the banner which you unfurl to the breeze as your religious and political motto: no compromise with slavery, no union with slaveholders." This was written by William Lloyd Garrison in The Liberator in 1845. So these were just a little sample of some of the powerful words that he would share. And the purpose of this was to persuade other people to join in this fight against slavery, either by refusing to own slaves themselves, by working on a political level to try to change the laws, or even by aiding in things such as the Underground Railroad or other options that would have helped Africans to free themselves. Harriet Beecher Stowe, on the other hand, was another kind of writer. But Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote lots of different texts, but one specifically was a fictional novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And this was a really, really important novel because it gave a really vivid and detailed story of the cruel mistreatment of enslaved Africans. This was really important because a lot of people connect really well to fiction. I think even most of us connect really well to fiction. We understand things a little bit better if it's told to us as a story. I really like reading nonfiction, but not everyone feels that way. So people can sometimes feel a little bit more connected to an idea if they can read it as a story, as a narrative. Frederick Douglass, pictured here once again, he was actually born a slave, but during the time that he was enslaved, did learn how to read. And then he eventually freed himself. He escaped slavery, and once he became an adult, he started using his words to convince other people all across the United States to join in the fight against slavery. His words are still echoed all over the place today. You'll see quotes by him all over the place. In fact, I have them on my shirt right here. Frederick Douglass authored so many different books and speeches, and was also the author and founder of an abolitionist newspaper called the North Star. So all three of these people had to use their writing skills in some way, shape, or form. The reason why this was really important was because at this particular time, you have to remember, there's no cell phones, there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's no YouTube, no Instagram, no Snapchat, no TikTok, no nothing, none of that. So if someone's giving a powerful speech, like Frederick Douglass would do quite often, 20, 50, 100, maybe 500 people hear it, but if you can write that down in a paper and distribute that paper to tens of thousands of people, it has a much more and longer lasting impact. So their writing skills were really, really important. On Wednesday and Thursday, we were looking specifically at Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman is a figure that many of us are really familiar with. She was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and it's important to note she did not start the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was already running in full force by the time Harriet Tubman joined. However, she became one of the leading conductors on the Underground Railroad because she made so many trips back. What you were tasked with doing on Wednesday was talking about why you think Harriet Tubman decided to become a conductor. And there's not really a whole lot of information on the page that was included in your packet about Harriet Tubman. They just kind of mention her at the end of the whole paragraph about the Underground Railroad. But I want to put forward a couple of things that maybe you might not have heard before, a couple of quotes from her to show just how much she really cared about this. One quote in particular, this was something that Harriet Tubman was quoted as saying, and it says, "I had reasoned in my mind there was one of two things that I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive." So why do we think Harriet Tubman decided to become a conductor? I believe this is because she believed in freedom for all enslaved peoples, not just herself. She was incredibly brave, incredibly strong, very smart. She was able to navigate herself through unknown terrain without being caught, without being severely injured. And there's another quote that really helps me to understand why she decided to become a conductor too. And this quote says, "I had crossed the line and I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land." I think what Harriet Tubman is saying here is that even once she got to freedom, she didn't have her friends and family with her. She didn't have her husband. She didn't have her parents or her brothers and sisters. She didn't have any of these people that she loved and cared about. So I think a big part of why she wanted to become a conductor was to bring people that she loved back with her into the land of freedom. On Thursday, you were tasked with reading the poem by Eloise Greenfield, and you had 5 pretty basic questions. The first one asks, why did Harriet Tubman say farewell to her friends? If you look at line 8 of that poem, you'll notice that Harriet Tubman said farewell to her friends specifically so that she could find freedom. This was the reason why she had to say goodbye to her friends. Number 2, the reason why she wanted to go north in particular was, according to line 12, because that's where those mean men couldn't find her. Slavery was already outlawed in many of the northern states and in the country of Canada, so heading north was a way for them to find freedom. Number 3 asked, how many times did she make that trip back down to the south to get more enslaved Africans to free themselves? And the answer to that is 19 times. She makes 19 trips on foot to go back and to get more people that she loved and cared about, or people who were just willing to free themselves, willing to take that risk. We can find that answer on line 13 of the poem. How many people did she end up freeing? And the best estimate that we have is 300. 300 people were able to free themselves under the leadership of Harriet Tubman on the Underground Railroad. Number 5 is a question that we have to think beyond the text. We have to make some inferences. What does the author mean when she says, "Didn't come into this world to be no slave and didn't stay one either"? As opposed to the other ones, this one doesn't have quite as much information in the text to help us. But what we do notice is if we look back and we think about some of our answers to these other questions, some of the things that we've talked about so far, I think that a big part of this is that Harriet Tubman believed that it was wrong, inherently evil and wrong, for people to enslave other people. So by saying that she didn't come into this world to be a slave, she's saying no one's meant to be a slave. No one's destined to be a slave. And then the author decides to use her language to emphasize how strong Harriet Tubman was in choosing to fight against the system of slavery, to free herself, and then to lead 300 other people to freedom as well. So that's where we're going to end for today. In typical Mr. Mathews fashion, I have talked way too much, so I'm going to let you guys get back to doing what you're doing. Video comment challenge. Harriet Tubman, at one point, was quoted as saying that she had the right to 2 things, liberty or death. And if she could not have one, she would have the other. My question to you is, what leader during the Revolutionary War, almost 100 years before that almost, what leader during the Revolutionary War also said that those were the 2 choices, liberty or death? Comment your answer at the bottom of this video, and I'll shout out the people who comment correctly in next week's video. All right, folks, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.